All right, now we get to, the heart of the meeting and the work, and that is item 3, which is the purpose and mission of the Racial Equity Ad-Hoc Committee. I'm going to turn this over to my chief of staff, who, along with Amit Barnes and Lainey Milstein, and many others on this call, because I always hate leaving people out, but I know I've really led, in really profound ways on this effort thus far, and put all this together to get us here today. So Kelly Rivas is going to lead this, but before this part of the agenda, but before we get it started, I just want to follow through on what Councilmember Vang had said a moment ago, and to publicly thank and recognize, as Councilmember Harris, who was involved as well, but especially the 2 members of this important committee for their incredible work they have done to get us to this point of council engagement. They've spent many hours, and it cannot be summed up in any particular timeline, but Vice Mayor Chenier and Councilmember Guerra, thank you for your leadership. And thank you for your staff as well, who have been deeply engaged in the work, advancing our council discussions and our city work to get us to this pivotal point. And it was your work, really specifically through the Law and Ledge Committee, to bring forward a draft racial equity resolution to the full council that has been critical for the beginning progress we have made as a city council in the city. So thank you. And thank you to Allison Joe, to Koi Say-Turn, and Alejandro Cabrera. Thank you, as well as Councilmember Harris again and his staff, Jocelyn Navarro, who have also been very, very engaged. With that, let me turn it over again to my chief of staff to help leading this effort, Kelly Fong Rivas. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Hello, Mayor. Hello, Vice Mayor, Councilmember Vang, and staff. It is an honor to be here with you today as we work together to advance racial equity for the city. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for this oral report for a PowerPoint presentation. Please just confirm you're able to see it. Got it. Great, thank you. Okay, so the purpose and mission of the Racial Equity Ad Hoc Committee overall, with this is our first meeting. I worked to, in the staff report, outline some of the steps that had gotten us here in the timeline, and you've heard those comments from Mayor and Councilmember Vang today. Overall, the mission, based on those comments and the discussions that city has been having, this is sort of the draft mission overall for you to react to. With the mission of the Racial Equity Ad Hoc Committee is for the City Council to align its intent to advance racial equity in city decision-making with the impacts of city policy, budget, and service delivery decisions. Number 2 is really to provide a space to help coordinate the various city racial equity initiatives, efforts, metrics, and best practices into a holistic citywide informed approach, rather than a siloed case-by-case approach, so that we can inform the work we're doing together. And 3, to really increase engagement, transparency, and accountability for the city's ongoing racial equity work. With that mission, the stated purposes that have been collected from council comments throughout the last several years can really be put into short, mid, and long-term efforts, with the short-term effort as discussion item 5 today on a rapid response tool for our ARP expenditures. Midterm efforts to really coordinate a racial equity workshop or series of racial equity workshops for council to build capacity together as a governing body. And then the longer term efforts that you may have heard before that I'll go into more detail here for you and for the community to serve as the public reporting body for a multi-year initiative that we have been calling Sacramento Centered on Racial Equity, or SCORE as the acronym. And that's really a work plan that's facilitated by Race Forward in partnership with community. So I'll get into that next. And if there are any questions at any point on this, please let me know. I will have time at the end of the long, mid, and short-term presentations to take questions as well. For the long-term efforts on the SCORE initiative, it's really important that we ground and center ourselves in an understanding about moving at the speed of trust. So this longer-term work is happening now and will extend into 2023. So who is Race Forward and who's working on this? We're working with Race Forward and community as a city In 2017, Race Forward united with the Center for Social Inclusion. Even though they had been founded in 1981, this effort with the Center for Social Inclusion really helped catalyze additional efforts nationwide. And as you can see from here, the city of Sacramento has been a member of GARE, which is the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, since 2018. And this engagement has also brought Race Forward into our city, working with community. The work together now is really making sure that we can facilitate a community-centered and led process. So Sacramento Centered on Racial Equity, or the SCORE Initiative and Work Plan Proposal, is something that Race Forward is developing in partnership with community. The feedback they've given us thus far and for council to share is included here in the next slides. I won't go through and read them all, but I think it's important, since this is the first time that community is really getting a look at this broader along with council members, that I do share a couple key things. So they do acknowledge the December 8, 2020 council meeting, where council affirmed its commitment to passing a racial equity resolution citywide, as well as affirm their appreciation of the creation of this racial equity ad hoc. Their scope of work proposal, and I'm quoting here for them since they are unable to join us today and have given me permission to share their feedback here. They really provide their recommendation to best accomplish equitable outcomes. And in doing so, they propose that we, the city of Sacramento, and community racial equity leaders together transform the city's internal and external structure, policies, procedures, and to achieve racial equity. Throughout this process of work together, they will offer us strategy development tools and facilitated workshops for the city of Sacramento and our communities of color to really shape governmental processes to truly serve all of our people. The key things that they wanted to highlight in that is that the city must be prepared to pass an ordinance to fully sustain this work. As a part of this effort, it must include the resource and staffing to implement the first key projects, to develop the knowledge and skills of all staff to do this work, and to really create the culture that expects racial equity as the norm. Their proposed scope of work outlines 3 key phases. And as you can see here, task 1 is really focused on the work we've already started with a draft city racial equity resolution. That's anticipated to go into the spring of 2022. And this is so that they can create community engagement efforts, meetings to really inform what that resolution says and what we bring back to council. Task 2 is developing engagement, partnership, accountability strategy to really center our communities of color for racial justice. And that work will continue after we have the finalized racial equity resolution into the summer of next year. Task 3 is really co-creating the citywide racial equity work plan with city and community to do the work we've heard council say about being able to apply a racial equity lens to our city decisions. And that is anticipated to go into spring of 23. The status update right now on where we are is here. And I will read this quote verbatim because I think it's important for us to hear from community as shared by Race Forward. They met with 15 local racial justice community leaders from diverse backgrounds the week of September 20 to discuss the scope of work and draft proposal. What they heard was this: we heard deep pain and broken trust as a result of city actions. There's a very clear need for healing and trust building at the very beginning of this work. In fact, it is apparent that without city ownership of the damage that city decisions created, this work will not be able to proceed. That said, their next meeting with community to continue this conversation is on October 28th. And this meeting will inform the development of an intentional truth-telling and trust-building component into task 1 of the proposed scope of work. Race Forward did affirm with us, however, that community leaders have given them the preliminary indication, and just to be clear, not a firm decision, but a preliminary indication on the following. 1, that community would like to see this proposed scope of work move forward with the addition of that work focused on truth-telling and trust building in phase 1, that they would support Race Forward, moving forward in this work as a facilitator with us to bring city and community together, and that they would support the creation of a racial equity council of community racial justice leaders to help guide the city's work. And community noted that there's a need to really create further details around what the purpose, authority, communications, accountability, makeup of this group would be, but that it may include 5 to 11 or more members. thinking ahead in terms of making sure that we are engaging all community and knowing that there are 15 particular racial justice leaders in our community that Race Forward has built a relationship and work with. I want to be clear about community-centered engagement, and that Race Forward has shared these comments about our racial justice leaders locally and their intention around centering and bringing in other community. They've committed that they will invite others to the table so that the discussion and decision can be made with the input and support of many other leaders and communities. And Race Forward fully supports that decision and emphasize that they are grateful for community's wisdom and willingness to share with us, as are we as city staff. The final just closing thoughts from Race Forward to share here are really applauding the city of Sacramento's leadership for acknowledging the real need and urgency to address these historic and systemic racial harms and to really respond to the impacts of these longstanding inequities in our community. So they have deep appreciation to the city council, the city manager's office, and the city for really working towards this. They did want to emphasize that in order for this work to be successful, that we must follow the lead of our community leaders. And they have clearly indicated that more time is needed to come to a decision that will hold and have the broader support of the community. Midterm, that brings us into our capacity building for City Council in the next year of creating racial equity workshops. This is a really just brief overline. This is something that I think the Ad Hoc will be able to work on and develop together with Race Forward at the next meetings. I'll go ahead and just skip through
Can I ask on that one, please?
Yes.
Is it important maybe in preparation for putting together effective workshops for the full City Council that we meet with the Race Forward leadership at some point?
Yes, I do think it will be effective and important.
Okay, so maybe that's one follow-up so we can.
And I'm hoping that after the October 28 meeting with community leaders, that we will have more information and a more finalized scope of work that they can come and meet and bring back to this ad hoc at the next meeting.
Kelly, can I ask a question now or should I wait till the end? Really?
Entirely up to you.
Okay. I was curious, the selection of the 15 folks, and I really appreciate the acknowledgement that, the table extends to more than the 15, is how were those folks selected and how were they part of that conversation? Just for me, because since I'm a new council member, I wanted to know what that process was.
Thank you for the question. We did not select, nor do we know who those 15 members are. This is Race Forward's work with community.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on that before I move on? Okay, so for the midterm,
I just have one comment really quickly, and I don't usually do wordsmithing, but if we go back to the mission or the charge really quickly, the one thing that I think is missing is on the third piece where you're talking about increasing engagement. I guess the question is with whom. If it's community engagement, then we need to call that out.
That's a great note. Thank you. I'll add that and share if members are in agreement.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Heading back into midterm, really the goal of those workshops are to be able to increase the City Council's training, capacity building, and coordination as an elected governing body around advancing racial equity. Which brings us into short term, which is discussion item 5. So I won't go into detail about it, but this is the rapid response tool and sort of a first iteration of our efforts to really develop a racial equity lens for our budget and policy decisions. So you will hear more about that in discussion item 5. But the goal of that is to guide our short-term equity-centered decisions related to the deployment of our federal ARP dollars. With that, that concludes the presentation. If there are any further questions and comments, I'm happy to take those.
I have one other comment if I can.
Go.
Madam Co-Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. So, it seems to me that one of the dangers in doing something like this is that it becomes either marginalized or standalone and not truly embedded into the everyday work, right? So this is not an initiative that has its own set of goals, but it's an initiative that we've undertaken, hopefully between the city, the council, and the community really change the way we think about these things and to put this lens on. And I'm not sure where it goes, but I think it's an important thing to call that out as well, that really the success of what we do really relies upon this work being part of our everyday work in the city, not something that's sitting on the side that we're working on. And I apologize, I'm not being very articulate about that. But I do think the danger is that it becomes, something on its own versus really embedding into all of the work we do, into every department that we do. That's the only way it's going to be successful. I mean, we're talking about trying to change a culture, not programmatic things.
Council member, if I can reflect just a little bit, and it's in the words I had prepared for my introduction. What we say as we continue and expand our practice in the city is that equity is not extra. And that's that notion that it permeates everything that we do. And so that is our intent with this.
Yeah, no, that's great. Those words are fine with me. I don't know if this is part of the mission. I mean, again, I think that should be a touch point. I mean, there's a set of questions that we should be asking ourselves along the way to make sure we're on the right path. That would certainly be one of them.
I want to follow up on Jay's comments in a moment, but I want to hear from the public and from my other colleagues as well.